So the Chiefs have been very busy lately, making a few surprising moves even today when they signed a rather unexpected quarterback to the practice squad, claimed a defensive back previously from the Cowboys, and then signed a beast of a pass-catching veteran running back with tons of NFL experience, and this is why they somehow got even scarier on offense this season. So let's talk about it. But first, how about those? All right, so much has happened in the last 24 to 36 hours, I can barely keep up. Let's start with what happened yesterday because the Chiefs got their roster down to 53 players last night. More shakeups did happen today, though, some pretty notable signings that I'm going to get into. One of them was a surprising pickup for a quarterback. Another was a much-needed running back addition. Very, very happy for that. But before I get into all of that, here's a quick reminder of what the 53-man roster looked like yesterday. There's going to be a couple of moves made today, so it's not going to look exactly like this, but very close. They had 2 quarterbacks in Patrick Mahomes and Carson Wentz, 2 running backs, Isaiah Pacheco and Clyde Edwards-Helaire, 1 fullback, a hybrid of sorts, in Carson Steele. That's probably going to change, by the way, the running back room and how that looks here very soon. Then for tight ends, KC opted for 4, Travis Kelce, Noah Gray, Jared Wiley, and the newly traded for Peyton Hendershot from the Cowboys. For more info on him and what he could bring to the team, check out this video here. Moving on, though, the offensive line has 10 guys, with 5 of them having 2 years in the league or less, 4 of them rookies, which is pretty crazy if you ask me. A lot of young guys with upside in this room. Those 10 players are Kingsley Suamataia, left tackle. Joe Tooney's going to be left guard. Center Creed Humphrey. Right guard Trey Smith. Right tackle Jawan Taylor. Then you have these 5, Wanye Morris, Mike Caliendo, Hunter Norzad, Ethan Driscoll, and CJ Hansen. So Kingsley, Norzad, Driscoll, and Hansen are all rookies, and then Wanye is just now entering year 2 in the league, so that's pretty crazy. It does help that Jawan Taylor has plenty of experience on the right side. Then the interior trio, plenty of experience and arguably the best interior trio in the entire NFL. And before I get to what the defense looked like on the initial 53 as of last night, I do want to point out that we have contract details on Creed Humphrey's massive extension. His cap hit for this year is $5.1 million, then $10.7 million in 2025, $18.1 million in 2026, followed by back-to-back years of $21.6 million cap hits in 2027 in 2028. It looks like his cap hit barely goes up for this year, which is great news. And then you could technically get out of his contract after 2026 with minimal dead money. But Creed will only be 28 at the time, so maybe a restructure or adjustment happens. But hopefully he's the centerpiece of the O-line for longer than just the next 3 seasons, 2024, 2025, and 2026. Anyway, back to this initial 53-man roster. KC rolled with 26 players on offense that we just talked about. Then they had 24 on defense. For the D-line, they had 4 defensive tackles, Chris Jones, Turk Wharton, Derek Nottie, and big ol' Mike Pennell. They then had 5 defensive ends, George Karlaftis, Mike Dana, Malik Herring, FAU, and the newly acquired via trade, Cameron Thomas from the Cardinals. And that's probably because FAU hasn't shown quite enough yet and they needed a little extra help. Not complaining about it one bit. They then had 5 linebackers, with those being Nick Bolton, Drew Tranquill, Leo Chanel, Jack Cochran, and Cam Jones. For corners, they had 6, but there's a shakeup here as well. Spoiler alert, but we'll get to that in a bit. Last night, though, the 6 corners were Trent McDuffie, Jalen Watson, Joshua Williams, Najee Johnson, Nick Jones, and Chris Roland Wallace. Some have Roland Wallace as a safety, just FYI, so some initial 53s are saying the Chiefs had 5 corners and 5 safeties, but the Chiefs have him on their roster as a corner, so for now, that's where I have him. Then for safeties, KC had 4, at least on mine, with those being Justin Reed, Brian Cook, Jamari Connor, and Jaden Hicks. They then rolled with 3 specialists. None of this was a surprise. Long snapper James Winchester, punter Matt Ariza, and kicker Harrison Butker. So, as of last night, that was how the initial 53-man roster was looking. And if you see this graphic here, to get down from 91 to 53, they waived a ton of players. According to the Chiefs website, it was 21 total waived last night. Then one guy was actually waived with an injury designation in safety Tyree Gillespeie. The injury is unknown at this point in time, but per Nick Jacobs, Gillespie cleared waivers, and that means he then reverted to the Chiefs' injured reserve. So they can either work an injury settlement out with him and release him, or keep his rights for the season going forward. We shall see what happens there as time goes on, maybe sooner rather than later, but we shall see. Then there were 4 players released. And just a reminder here, if a player has more than 4 years of NFL experience, They do not have to clear waivers and are free to sign with any team right away, but the 21 players that KC waived, they have less than 4 years of NFL experience and therefore had to clear waivers, meaning every other team aside from KC had to pass up on them on the waiver wire in order for the Chiefs to sign them to the practice squad. And so that brings us to today. Teams had until noon to claim players off the waiver wire, and if they did not, those players could then sign with any team. And normally a lot of players from a team's 90-man roster ends up filling out the bulk or the foundation of said team's practice squad. And for the Chiefs, that is mainly looking true for them as well. But before I get to that, as a reminder, an NFL team can have 16 players on the practice squad, a 17th if it's an international player with an exemption placed on them, just FYI, and only 10 players on the practice squad can be rookies, so players that don't have a fully accrued season, or players who are on the active roster for fewer than 9 regular season games during their accrued season or seasons. And then you have up to 4 players with no more than 2 accrued seasons allowed on a practice squad, and up to 6 of them can have unlimited amount of accrued seasons, i.e. vested veterans. So in short, teams can have up to 6 vested vets and 10 players with a combo of 2 accrued seasons or less. Now let's get into today's news and all the players who did end up on Kansas City's practice squad, with all 16 of them being familiar faces. The 16th is technically the 17th in Jason Chu-Godric, so there's one spot currently open on the practice squad, with that being a rather surprising quarterback. But before I get to that new addition, the rest of the guys that returned from the Chiefs' 90-man roster cutdowns are as follows. Running backs Emani Bailey and Keontae Ingram, tight end Baylor Cupp, offensive tackle Lucas Niang, and worth noting, Niang got surpassed by Ethan Driscoll on the 53, but he does land on the practice squad. Then Jason Chu-Godric was the other tackle on the practice squad, with that international exemption being placed on him. From there, I see 3 receivers in Justin Ross, Nico Remigio, and Montrell Washington. I'm glad to see all 3 of these guys make it, honestly. I'm not sure what the future holds for Justin Ross, but Nico and Montrell Washington are backup returner options on special teams if needed. Washington did that last year, for example, when injuries hit the wide receiver room, so you never know when their services may be needed this year. And before I move on to the defensive practice squad additions, I do want to point out a few things here about players that I did not see signed to the practice squad. Both Deneric Prince and Louis Rees-Zammit are not there. That means either the Chiefs or the players were ready to move on, so I'm not really sure what's next for Deneric Prince at this point in time. Meanwhile, Louis Rees-Zammit was reportedly close to finalizing a deal with the Jacksonville Jaguars, per Jordan Schultz of Bleacher Report this afternoon. And then a few hours later, it was confirmed by Tom Hamilton of ESPN that LRZ did indeed sign to the practice squad of the Jags. And honestly, I don't even blame LRZ. The weather there is way better, and I believe the Jags had their international player spot open. So for now, that's all she wrote for the Welshman in Kansas City, and it's a bit of a bummer to see him gone. Then, with Baylor Cupp signing to the practice squad, that means that at least for now, veteran tight end Irv Smith Jr. is not on the practice squad, the only veteran released that didn't end up there out of the 4. He's a guy that I thought could very well end up there, so a little bit of a surprise. Then for receivers, Cornell Powell is surprisingly not on the practice squad, having been there the last several years. Maybe he ends up there again one day, but for now, that is also all she wrote for Cornell Powell. And lastly, you'll notice there isn't a quarterback listed on there. The expectation was that Chris Oladokun would be the team's practice squad quarterback, but the curveball that was announced today was that the Chiefs actually signed former Patriots quarterback Bailey Zappe. I think they claimed him off waivers. He's not yet on the list, though, because I would assume he's got to travel to KC and pass a physical. But this is happening. Zappe will now be the primary quarterback on the practice squad. And I'm a big fan of this move for several reasons. First is the fact that while he wasn't a great starting quarterback in New England, he does have some experience in a starting role, which could come in handy should disaster strike and his name gets called. He's appeared in 14 games over the last 2 seasons, throwing for a little over 2,000 yards with a 63% completion rate, as well as 11 touchdowns and 12 INTs. So yeah, right now you have Carson Wentz behind Patrick Mahomes. That's QB2, and he's a great backup. But now you also have Zappe, who started some games as well, compared to Chris O starting in 0 total games so far. Another reason I like this move is because Zappe is still young at just 25 years old. Carson Wentz is only on a 1-year deal, and if he moves on at the end of the season, maybe Zappe could take over as Mahomes' backup for years to come. We'll have to see. Andy Reid clearly sees something in him, though, that intrigued him enough to bring him onto the practice squad instead of Chris Oladokun. And if he impresses the coaching staff enough this year, they could sign him to a multi-year backup quarterback deal instead of cycling through older veterans on one-year deals like they've done the past few years. And at the very least, he's an upgrade over Chris Oladokun on the practice squad, and that's only going to help with the development of other skilled players on the practice squad like Justin Ross. But hey, let me know your thoughts on this. Do you like the signing of Bailey Zappe over Chris Oladokun or not really? All right, before we get to the biggest news of the day by far, I do want to finish out the list of practice squad players that were added today on the defensive side of the ball specifically. There's 2 linebackers in Cole Christensen and Swayze Bozeman. Then along the D-line, you have defensive tackles Neil Farrell, Matt Dickerson, and Fabian Lovett, as well as defensive end Truman Jones. And I actually love seeing most of these guys return. Dickerson played a lot for the Chiefs last year. Neil Farrell can keep growing, and Fabian Lovett showed some promise in camp and preseason. Then before the defensive end, Cameron Thomas that the Chiefs just traded for, Truman Jones was most likely making the 53-man roster, so he's a guy to keep eyes on as well, and just a solid depth piece to have on there. Then for the secondary, there's safety Deon Bush and cornerback Keith Taylor. Deon Bush is a very valuable depth piece, and you can easily call upon this man when needed. He's played a lot of snaps for the team over the last couple of years and even caught an INT in the AFC Championship against the Ravens. And with that, there's the full list. You can see it on screen. All 15 players on the practice squad, with Jason Godric being the international player and Bailey Zappe soon to be the 16th. Now, the Chiefs weren't even done there. They signed Juju Smith-Schuster on Monday, traded for a tight end and defensive end after that, and today they signed 2 players to the active 53-man roster. The first is defensive back Eric Scott. He actually went to college at Southern Miss, playing there for 3 years and tallying 78 tackles, 5 INTs with 2 pick sixes his senior year, as well as 12 passes defensed and 2 fumble recoveries over his collegiate career. And Scott is actually a KC area native. He went to Baser Linwood High School, which, crazy enough, is where I went to high school. It was a tiny high school too, so go Bobcats. Something else funny about this signing is that last year, the Cowboys traded a 2024 fifth-round pick to move up in the 6th round and drafted him, and the pick they acquired to do that was actually from the Chiefs. So you see, Eric Scott was meant to be a KC Chief all along. He didn't appear in any games during his rookie season with the Cowboys, but he did have a productive preseason this year, earning a 76 run defense grade from PFF, plus 1 INT, and a forced incompletion while allowing a passer rating of just 53.2. And if you look at his RAS, he's not the fastest player in the world, but he's got good size at 6 foot and 204 pounds. With long arms. He tested poorly in the 40-yard dash and the 10 and 20-yard splits, but had elite scores in both vertical and broad jump, and with the Chiefs claiming him, that means he's got to be added to the active roster, which they did. And that also means they had to let somebody go in order to make room for him on the 53, and that was actually another defensive back in Nick Jones. Jones didn't have the best preseason, but maybe the second-year corner ends up on the practice squad in KC. If he does, somebody else is going to have to get let go to make room for him in the coming days, and if that happens, I will definitely let you know. But next up, the Chiefs are also going to need to let somebody else on the 53-man roster go, and that's because the signing of the day was veteran running back Samaje Perine. And before I get into all the stuff about Perine, it does make me wonder what's next in the running back room. Are they going to place CEH on IR or something just due to his mental health issues, his health issues in general? Does he go to like a PUP list? What is going to happen with CEH? Or do they opt to keep 4 running backs total and let somebody else go on the offensive side of the ball? Because right now you have Isaiah Pacheco, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and then 1 fullback in Carson Steele. If you add Perine, do they keep 4 running backs and let go of what? A tight end or an offensive lineman? Like, what do you do there? That's going to be the biggest question to see, and I'm waiting for that news to drop. And if that last name sounds familiar, Perine, it's because it should. Samaje is cousins with LaMichael Perine, who was with the Chiefs last year. You may also know Samaje during his stint with the Bengals because he made some wild plays against Kansas City when there. Anyway, Perine was released by Denver yesterday, and now the 7-year vet agreed to a 1-year deal with the Chiefs today, which adds another weapon for Kansas City's offense, and I like this for Several reasons. I like it a lot. But before I get to those, here's a little bit more on Perine. He was drafted back in 2017, and since then has played for 4 different franchises, most notably the Bengals, as he had a brief stint with them in 2019 before joining the Dolphins and found his way back to Cincy, where he played from 2020 to 2022. He most recently was with the Broncos last year. They sucked, though, but he still had a pretty good season, all things considered. And so far in his career, he rushed for 1,830 yards and 8 touchdowns while averaging 4 yards per carry. However, where he really makes his money is in the pass game. He's had 151 career receptions for 1,191 yards and 6 touchdowns. That's an average of 7.9 yards per catch. Not only that, but he's also been great in pass protection throughout his career. Jerick McKinnon was the Chiefs' reliable third down back for the past few years, but now it appears that Perine will come in and take that role at least for this season. Now, a couple of other interesting stats for Perine that showcases his ability in the pass game are as follows. Last year, he led all running backs league-wide who ran at least 15 or more routes in yards per route run with 2.09. And then if you look at the last 2 seasons, he's also had 7 catches on screens out of the backfield. Not a lot, but it's been extremely effective. He's averaged 11.3 yards per catch on those plays. And if that wasn't enough, Perine was 7th among running backs with 455 receiving yards last year and 3rd with 204 receiving yards after contact. Guys, we got a dog. Now, he didn't pan out in Denver for one way or another, but that franchise is currently in the dumpster right now. So I'm going to just say I really like this signing. It was a position of need for the Chiefs. This was the only area I was truly concerned about in the running back room. Pass protection and a true receiving threat on third downs out of the backfield, and he is definitely going to be doing that for the Chiefs this year. It's also interesting to note that Perine clearly wants to be here in Kansas City because he's a vested veteran. So when the Broncos released him yesterday, he didn't have to clear waivers and was free to sign with any team that he wanted, and that team was the back-to-back Super Bowl champions, the Kansas City Chiefs. You know he wants a ring, so he's got a pretty good chance if he's here in KC. With all that being said, let me know your thoughts on the signing of Samaje Perine, and if you are as happy as I am to see him in Kansas City. And until next time, let's go. Let's freaking go. How about those?